Yes, Mr. Netanyahu. I have received the $7,000 checks. I have them here. I will be sure to deposit them into Bitcoin accounts so they cannot be traced. Yes, the puppeteering continues. Yes, evil things. Nasty, evil things. Yes, we are united. We will get back to exposing the fake anti-Semitism in service of the master plan. Hello, everyone. We are live. Welcome back. We're getting right back into it. It's fact check time. We're almost done this video, by the way. Rock and roll, rock and roll. Let's do it.
I've read the polls. The polls show that these polls are taken like every 2 weeks since the Gaza genocide. And you know what the poll showed?
80% support.
5% of Israeli Jews thought Israel was using too much force. 95% said either sufficient force or not enough force. Of those 95%, 40%.
We're going to adjudicate this polling right off the start here. Thanks for being back with me, everyone. Make sure you smash that like button when you get back into the room. Oh, heck yeah. All right, all right, all right. I am live a bit early today, so I don't expect many of you to be here, which is fine. You'll be able to see this after. Just want to make sure I get through this. I was thinking of doing a live stream on our other live channel. If you search Pangburn Live, you'll find our other live channel where we do community conversations there. Find the Pangburn Discord here. Boom, boom, boom. All right. We're doing up our city limits. I have so many kids' songs stuck in my head. Oh, it's unbelievable. Although I like a lot of them. Drifting Wood Debate says, nice to watch while I dine alone. Well, you're not alone. You're with me. You're not alone now. Hopefully you're a member of the Discord server now. All right. We'll go a little bit further. We are going to adjudicate all of this polling that's being discussed.
Percent said not enough force. I can go through many, many polls. Israel, to its, I wouldn't say honor, but it has a citizen.
Israel, to its honor, has made great strides. I think I can do a pretty good Norm Finkelstein now. I'll have to figure out Hasan. It's a little more subtle. Where, oh, where? Okay, good.
It's an army. I think the citizen army is a correct concept. Everybody should have to pay that ultimate price to defend their country. An army should not be composed of the poor or those who have no futures. So they say you benefit from the independence of your country. Everybody should have to serve to defend the country up to and including the ultimate sacrifice. Okay? But then there's a problem. You have a citizen army. You know what a citizen army means? It's representative of the population.
I am live.
No, if that citizen army is committing genocide, yes, it's also representative of the population. It's not an...
Sorry to yell into the mic. Here in Oaxaca, Mexico, cars drive by and they sell things. And our Agua water guy is here, and he sells like fruit mixed water with ice. Oh, it's so good. It's just like it's literally fresh fruit blended up and frozen and then mixed with water. So tasty. There's so much fresh fruit here. All right.
Unfair generalization to say this is a nation of child killers, to say this is a nation of child murderers. That's a fact. So then you say, well, but the number who actually target children, yes, it's horrible. Yes, it's terrible. The most recent.
No, it's the complicity.
The most recent UN Commission of Inquiry report on assaults on children, they targeted an orphanage, But, okay, you say that's still a handful. But here's a question. It was being reported already in
They targeted an orphanage. Okay, we got some information regarding. Thanks for being with me, everyone. Make sure you smash that like button when you get into the room. I know we're a bit early today, but it is what it is. So the likely source for this poll, Tel Aviv University, January 2024. The Peace Index was conducted January 8th to 15th, 2024 by Tel Aviv University. Researchers Nimrod Rosler and Alan Yachter with fieldwork by iPanel. It surveyed 605 Israeli adults, including 502 Jewish respondents and 103 Arab respondents, weighted to constitute a representative national adult sample. The reported maximum sampling error for the survey was plus 4.2 percentage points. Question 11 asked, how would you define the use of force by the IDF in the war in Gaza until now? Here are the response rates. So we'll look at the response: Israeli Jews, Arab Israelis, and all Israelis. So the question is, how would you define the use of force by the IDF in the war in Gaza until now? 50.8% of Israeli Jews said that it was appropriate force, so about half. 20.4% of Arab Israelis said it was appropriate force. All Israelis, when we look at that number, 45.6%, so not quite half. Too much force? Israeli Jews says 3.2%. Arab Israelis said 55.3%. All Israelis, 12.1% with regards to too much force. Too little force, 43.4% said, so just under, well, quite a bit under half, but still 43.4% said too little force. 3.9% of Arab Israelis said too little force. 36.7% of Israelis said too little force. And then 2.6% of Israeli Jews said they don't know. 20.4% of Arab Israelis said they don't know. And 5.6% of all Israelis said don't know. So these are the published primary source figures. That means Finkelstein's 40% said not enough force is a perfectly reasonable rounded description of 43.4% of Jewish respondents saying the IDF had used too little force. More importantly, the other numbers he gives also match. This is what makes the identification especially compelling. Finkelstein's sequence was approximately 5% of Israeli Jews said too much force, 95% said sufficient or not enough force, and 40% said not enough force. The TAU survey says 3.2% said too much force. 50.8 plus 43.4 equals 94.2% says appropriate or too little force. 43.4% says too little force. So his three number recollection, 5, 95, and 40% corresponds almost perfectly to 3.2, 94.2%, and 43.4. By the way, all of this stuff will be compiled into the final report when we have all that information. That is much stronger than simply saying his claim was, quote, compatible with some polling. The university's own summary rounds the same results to 51% appropriate and 43% too little firepower among Jewish Israelis. This is the historical trend makes his number even more plausible. The same Tel Aviv University polling series had found an even more hawkish result approximately 2 months earlier. In November 2023, about 2.5 weeks after October 7th, 58% of Jews respondents said the IDF was using too little firepower, 37% said the amount was correct, and only 2% said excessive force was being used. By January, too little fell from 58% to 43%. Appropriate rose from 37% to 51%. So about 40% was about an implausible outlier. It fell within a documented series in which a very substantial portion of Jewish Israelis wanted more force used in Gaza. What about the Pew poll we originally cited throughout this video? So Pew surveyed 101 Israeli adults from March 3rd to April 4th, 2024. Among all Israelis, it found 39% response about right, 34% not gone far enough, and 19% gone too far. That's where our original 34% correction came from. But there were two problems while using that as a primary check against Finkelstein. First, Pew's 34% is for all Israeli adults, whereas Finkelstein's surrounding sentence explicitly concerns Israeli Jews. Second, it is a different survey conducted months later. Pew itself shows how important subgroup selection is. Only 4% of Israeli Jews said Israel had gone too far, versus 74% of Arab Israelis. Ideologically, 52% of Israelis on the right said the response had not gone far enough, versus 24% of centrists and 9% of the left. Among respondents with a favorable opinion of Netanyahu, 45% said the response had not gone far enough. So the earlier report was effectively comparing Finkelstein's claim about Jewish Israelis against Pew's number for all Israelis. That was not the optimal population match. Let's take a little bit further here. Ooh, see this, everyone? This is what the Oaxaca Aguacar delivers. So this is like, they call this tropical. This has fresh mango, passion fruit, sour sop, which is a cool fruit. You should look up sour sop, and probably guava in this as well. It comes ice cold. And yeah, there's a guy that drives around our neighborhood, comes by once in a while, and he plays a particular kind of song, so we know he's coming. That particular guy we can also call if we want him to stop by. But yeah, that's how things work in Oaxaca here in Mexico. A lot of people driving around selling things. There's a massive fresh fruit truck that comes by weekly. So many different things. So it's pretty cool. What up, Spy Math 1393, if that's your real name? You say, I don't remember people complaining that America was too strong in their response after 9/11. There were many millions of people complaining about that. Finkelstein also said, quote, they targeted an orphanage. So he said they targeted an orphanage, not that they struck an orphanage. So the motive obviously needs to be qualified. There is, of course, a supported core. We have intentional targeting supported by UNCOI. So the important question here is what targeted means. Did Israel actually strike an orphanage? Yes. High confidence in this. On October 2nd, 2024, an Israeli strike hit the El Amal Orphan Society, El Amal Orphanage in Gaza City. Reuters reported contemporaneously that an Israeli strike hit the facility, which was also sheltering displaced people, killing at least 5 people, according to medics. That means the weakest possible interpretation of Finkelstein's sentence, Israel bombed an orphanage, which would be the weakest interpretation, is well supported and should not be classified as misinformation. But again, remember the quote was, they targeted an orphanage. The casualty number evolved between sources. Contemporary reports variously gave at least 5 or 6 fatalities. A later UN Commission investigation concluded that 9 people, including 4 children, were killed and 11 adults injured. Oh, that's awful. The difference is important, but does not place the occurrence of the strike in serious doubt. What did the UN Commission actually find? Finkelstein appears to be referring to the June 2026 report of the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, titled, quote, "The Essence of Childhood Has Been Destroyed. Israel's deliberate targeting of Palestinian children in the occupied Palestinian territory since October 7th, 2023. The report specifically investigated the Al Amal attack. According to the Commission's reconstruction, the strike occurred around 12:45 a.m. on October 2nd, 2024. The orphanage was housing 143 orphans, 62 boys and 81 girls. Approximately 3,000 displaced people, including hundreds of children, were also sheltering there. 9 people were ultimately documented as killed, including 4 children. 11 adults were injured. The building itself sustained significant damage. There had been no prior warning or evacuation order. The commission said the facility was clearly identifiable as an orphanage. Surrounding structures reportedly did not show comparable impact. The commission went beyond saying an orphanage happened to be hit. It concluded from the attack pattern that the building itself had been intentionally selected as the target. Why did the commission infer intentional targeting? This was not simply, quote, a bomb hit an orphanage, therefore Israel deliberately targeted it. The commission assembled a circumstantial targeting case. It reportedly identified evidence consistent with a large precision-guided munition, apparently a GBU-32 class 1,000-pound bomb, and emphasized several facts together. Direct impact. The munition struck the orphanage itself rather than merely causing incidental blast damage from a distant strike. Localized damage pattern. The commission reported that nearby buildings were not similarly affected, which it interpreted as evidence against the orphanage merely being collateral damage from a strike elsewhere. Known or knowable civilian character. The commission said the facility was clearly marked and concluded Israeli forces should have known its location and character. No warning. No evacuation warning was identified before the nighttime strike. Large civilian presence. The facility was housing not only orphans, but thousands of displaced civilians. The commission therefore concluded that the circumstances indicated intent to target the building itself, despite the known or reasonably knowable presence of children and displaced civilians. The commission also made a legal finding. The commission did not stop at evidentiary inference about target selection. Its legal analysis concluded that the attack violated the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precautions in attack, and characterized the intentional attack of the civilian facility as a war crime involving intentionally directing an attack against a civilian object not shown to be a military object. The broader 2026 report also concluded that Israeli forces had deliberately targeted Palestinian children and children's infrastructure in multiple contexts. But the procedural status matters. A UN Commission of Inquiry finding is not a criminal conviction or final judgment by an international court. The commission applies an investigative evidentiary standard commonly framed around reasonable grounds rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So we should say the UN Commission found that Israel intentionally targeted the orphanage rather than an international court proved Israel deliberately attacked the orphanage. Now, all of these things at some point, likely around the end of 2029, early 2030, this information is almost certainly going to be adjudicated at the international court level, and then Israel will have an opportunity to provide their counter evidence. Israel does not owe counter evidence to these UN Commission reports, but they will be tasked with providing counter evidence and their explanations, their arguments when it comes to the International Court of Justice hearings on these issues. Surely it seems, based on what's available here, this particular issue of targeting an orphanage, allegedly, will be adjudicated. Independent evidence supports the underlying event. I wish I could share this. So in Oaxaca, Mexico, this is called agua. This is called water, like basically agua, like fruit flavored water. And it's very, very common around here. Like if someone says you want to go get a water, they're often referring to fruit flavored water. And some of them are like creamy with milk products and things like that. I, for one, like the ones that are made with natural fruit. I wish I could share it with all of you. But just imagine like the coldest, tasty, natural fruit mixed water you could imagine. Make sure you smash that like button. Thanks for being with me. I know I'm a bit early today, but we just had to get at it. So independent evidence supports the underlying event. The event was not discovered for the first time by the 2026 Commission. Reuters reported on the day of the attack that an Israeli strike, quote, hit the Al Amal Orphan Society. That's a really responsible way of reporting this kind of stuff on the day of an attack. An Israeli strike hit the Al Amal Orphan Society, as opposed to saying this was targeted. Now, there is good evidence to suggest that it was targeted. Perhaps Israel has a piece of evidence that we are not aware of as to why it should be deemed a legitimate military target. But that will be up to that international court adjudication process, right? The independent contemporary reporting is valuable because it establishes the basic event without relying on the later commission's broader thesis about Israeli conduct. Reuters also reported an Israeli explanation for a different strike that day on the Nusret Girls' School. The IDF said the attack targeted Hamas militants operating from a command center in the compound, but Reuters' account contains no equivalent Israeli explanation for the Al Amal orphanage strike. Did Israel say Hamas was operating from the orphanage? There doesn't seem to be any evidence that that has been a publicized Israeli position. Israel strongly rejects the commission's broad conclusions. There is important counter evidence at the institutional and methodological level. Israel's foreign ministry issued a detailed response to the 2026 Commission report rejecting its central thesis. Israel argues that the Commission is structurally biased against Israel, relies excessively on unidentified witness and secondary material, fails to incorporate sufficient military operational context, inadequately considers Hamas military use of civilians' environments, applies this evidentiary standard inconsistently, and systematically converts tragic civilian casualties into evidence of deliberate child targeting. Israel explicitly rejects the proposition that it has a policy of intentionally targeting Palestinian children and says the IDF takes measures intended to mitigate civilian harm. Those objections absolutely belong, of course, in our fact check. But there is an important limitation to the rebuttal. There doesn't seem to be any specific Israeli rebuttal to al-Amal itself. That does not mean there isn't a specific rebuttal. But if this is a potential war crime that is brought to court and tried in court at the ICJ level, then surely Israel will attempt to mount a defense. Or perhaps they will point to some crazed lunatic operator targeted that building and just did it himself, and he wasn't approved to be striking that building. Like who knows? This is why the professional courts are needed to adjudicate things like this. So the most important semantic distinction here to consider: targeted an orphanage versus targeted it because it was an orphanage. So let's look at Proposition A. Proposition A: Israeli forces intentionally selected the Al-Amal orphanage building for attack. There is substantial evidence supporting this, and a UN commission specifically concluded it occurred. Again, not the ICJ, but a UN commission did. Proposition B: Israeli forces attacked the building because it was an orphanage and wanted to kill orphans. That much stronger motive claim is not established by this incident alone. Doesn't mean that wasn't the case, but that needs to be further adjudicated. The commission's evidence addresses target selection. The building was apparently the intended object of attack. It does not independently reveal the targeting officer's subjective reason. Quote, "We are bombing this because it contains orphans." Those are separate propositions. There could theoretically have been an undisclosed belief that the structure contained a military target. Whether that belief existed, whether it was reasonable, and whether the target would justify the weapon and circumstances are unresolved in the public record reviewed here. So, yeah, was a 1,000-pound bomb necessary for this particular target and what was being targeted or what was believed to be the case? Is this a case of bad information, bad intelligence? There are a lot of things that need to be adjudicated here. And of course, this does not establish Finkelstein's, wider generalization about nation of child murderers. Evidence that Israeli military unit deliberately attacked an orphanage does not logically establish that every Israeli citizen or Israeli society collectively is a child murderer. We went through a lot of explicit in this video anti-Semitism last episode. I don't know if we're going to have more of that here, but there was a fair amount, like a very large section there that contained a lot of what I would consider to be explicit anti-Semitism based on academic standards of adjudicating and judging anti-Semitism. Even if the strike was intentional, it was unlawful, and individual commanders committed a war crime, responsibility attaches to identifiable decision makers, commanders, operators, policymakers, and, where evidence establishes it, wider institutional structures. It cannot simply be transferred onto an entire nationality. So the orphanage evidence may strongly support a specific allegation against Israeli forces while doing essentially nothing to validate Finkelstein's collective attribution to every Israeli. So, after all that information, what is the publication safe formulation? The correction here. Israel struck Gaza City's Al Amal orphanage on October 2nd, 2024. A 2026 UN Commission of Inquiry concluded, based on the strike pattern and surrounding evidence, that the building was intentionally targeted and that the attack constituted a war crime. Israel rejects the Commission's broader methodology and allegations of deliberate child targeting, but no specific public Israeli military explanation for Al Amal strike was identified. And remember to keep in mind that a UN Commission of Inquiry is not an adjudication by the International Court of Justice. A lot of people confuse this when they see UN Commission of Inquiry, and I think the UN part can be a little confusing, thinking that that means this is a finalized finding that has been judged upon and adjudicated by the International Court. This, of course, does not mean that. All right, rock and roll. Make sure you smash that like button. Everyone, share the stream. I posted on X. If you guys are on X, I see a few of you have liked the post. If you could hit that repost button, that would be fantastic. There's the link for you guys. I would love you dearly for it. And share it on social media. Let's get some more people in here. Love to see it. We got to make fact checking like this. We got to make epistemic responsibility and rigor more popular in this world.
Mid-2024, it was already being reported Israel's using starvation as a method of war in Gaza. Everybody agreed on that. The EU foreign policy chief, Gutierrez, everybody agreed. Israel's using starvation as a method of war.
Why do I feel like this everyone thing isn't going to be as concrete as Norm Finkelstein says it is? I mean, it's a good prediction based on all the things in this video he's gotten wrong or is spreading propaganda, misinformation, and anti-Semitism. It's not that he's been wrong about everything, but wow, he has demonstrated some really bad reasoning for someone who's a PhD, who has a PhD in political science. This is why I always say when I see political science PhD, I always scroll to be like it with the hopes of seeing a minor or a major in philosophy to go along with that, because there's nothing necessarily about having a political science PhD that is going to point you in the direction of good reasoning, mastering logic, these kinds of things that I think requires you to be a competent thinker and to be able to know how to harness a reliable rigorous epistemic standard that relies on things like empiricism. Deeper fact check. My initial findings are that, okay, the claim is everyone agreed Israel was using starvation as a method of war. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, found reasonable grounds for the war crime of starvation against Netanyahu and Gallant, and multiple bodies documented severe deprivation. Quote, everyone agreed is, of course, a false universal, and warrant is not a warrant is not a final conviction. So multiple bodies documented severe deprivation, and the ICC found reasonable grounds for a starvation war crime allegation. That is not the same as everyone agreed, and a warrant is not a final conviction. We are going to adjudicate this a little deeper because I want to read a bit more information into the record. But let's keep going here.
Okay? Now, it's not easy to use starvation as a method of war. You have to seal all their points of entry. You have to blow up food banks in
Yeah, so just keep in mind throughout this, a warrant is not a final conviction, because that can get very confusing as well.
Gaza, in order to make that work, the whole Israeli army was implicated. And you know what? You know who you're trying to starve? 1.1 million of those 2.3 million Gazans are children.
Yeah.
You are concretely implicated, or
If, I must say, if it is found by the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court that Netanyahu and Gallant are guilty of using starvation as a method of war, I can't see anything less than a life sentence behind bars being appropriate for that. That would be one of the most disgusting crimes. I mean, I want to say in world history, with how many people were relying on food. And again, if this can be demonstrated, but holy man, there are few things more evil than purposefully starving people or using starvation as a method of war. Again, right now there is a warrant. The ICC has found reasonable grounds for the war crime of starvation against Netanyahu and Gallant. Multiple bodies documented severe deprivation. We're going to look at more information related to this. But again, everyone has agreed that this is the case is false universal. But this one is a big issue. We need to adjudicate this further. Smash that like button, folks. Welcome back.
to use your word, complicitous in starving children. Okay, guys, you lost me. If I meet somebody in the street or at the beach, because I'm right near Coney Island Beach, and the person says, I'm from Gaza, I'm from Israel, I walk away, won't talk. You lost me. So to get back to your original.
This is getting to that anti-Semitism again. Like, you know, he mentioned Israel there, but Finkelstein has been teasing at this entire time, and in some cases explicitly just saying, you know, how is it, you know, irrational for me to apply the greater crimes of Israel that he sees, and Israel is meant to be the state of the Jews, and how is it irrational for him to feel animosity towards Jews that he sees anywhere because that's their state, and look at what they're doing. That's anti-Semitism. That's group attribution. So this was said in the last video. We went through this a lot in the last video, and Norm Finkelstein just doesn't seem to realize that this is anti-Semitic or racist, call it whatever you want. Okay. Okay, so Foreign Policy Chief Gutierrez, everybody agreed Israel is using starvation as a method of war. This occurs immediately after Finkelstein says this was already being reported in mid-2024. Let's look. So it seems as though Finkelstein might be actually referring to Joseph Borrell here, not Antonio Gutierrez. Because Antonio Gutierrez was not a foreign policy chief. He was and is UN Secretary General. This might just be an error mistake getting names mixed up. In contrast, Joseph Borrell's precise title was EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security policy, routinely described as the EU's foreign policy chief. Even more importantly, Borrell delivered an extraordinarily close match to Finkelstein's wording at the UN Security Council on March 12th, 2024. Quote, starvation is being used as a weapon of war. Borrell said the crisis was man-made, that normal road access was being artificially closed, and then made that explicit accusation. This gets even stronger. In his March 28th, 2024 declaration, ICJ President Nawaf Salam reproduced Borrell's statement and explicitly identified him as, quote, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, before reproducing the, quote, starvation weapon of war language. So we have almost, okay. So all of this makes it quite plausible that either, the YouTube ASR turned Borrell into something else. Finkelstein himself mistakenly said Guterres while recalling Borrell, or the audio contains some intermediate phrase that the captions mangle. Okay, so therefore, let's go back a bit and let's figure out what is said here.
Those 2.3 million Gazans are children.
Yeah.
You are concretely implicated, or to use your word, complicitous in starving children. Okay, guys, you lost.
Let me go back a bit here.
And hated all Germans? I don't.
We
yes,
did this yesterday.
But would I argue? No. As in children, you have targeted too many in their head. You have targeted too many in their chest. Showed
80% support.
5% of the Israeli Jews thought Israel was using too much force. 95% said either sufficient force or not enough force. Of those 95%, 40% said not enough force. I can go through many, many polls. Israel, to its, I wouldn't say honor, but it has a citizen army. I think the citizen army is a correct concept. Everybody should have to pay that ultimate price to defend their country. An army should not be composed.
We're just going through this again because I want to sort out something in the transcript, because we are going to be generating our final report after this. If you guys could share the stream on X, that would be fantastic. There's my post right there. You guys have it. Rock and roll.
Of the poor or those who have no futures. So they say you benefit from the independence of your country. Everybody should have to serve to defend the country up to and including the ultimate sacrifice. Okay? But then there's a problem. You have a citizen army. You know what a citizen army means? It's representative of the population. Now, if that citizen army is committing genocide, it's also representative of the population. It's not an unfair generalization to say this is a nation of child killers, to say this is a nation.
Yes, it is unfair.
Nation of child murderers. That's a fact.
It's an unfair generalization. Just like, if during, U.S. bombing during the Afghanistan war, if there was if there were instances where children were killed, and to generalize the United States as a nation of child killers, like when you take in the totality of what the United States is it fair to overgeneralize the United States and the people who identify as United States citizens as being child killers for the acts of a handful of people?
So then you say, well, but the number who actually target children, yes, it's horrible. Yes, it's terrible. The most recent.
No, it's the complicity.
The most recent UN Commission of Inquiry report on assaults on children, they targeted an orphanage, you know. But okay, you say that's still a handful. But here's a question. It was being reported already in mid 2024. It was already being reported. Israel's using starvation as a method of war in Gaza. Everybody agreed on that.
No, not everyone agreed.
The EU
So we've already been through this. I'm just waiting to hear the names.
Foreign Policy Chief Gutierrez.
The EU Foreign Policy Chief Gutierrez, which I believe is the incorrect. Yeah, so that's just a mistake by Finkelstein, and we corrected that. Antonio Gutierrez was not a foreign policy chief. He was the UN Secretary General. Joseph Borrell's precise title was EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, routinely described as EU's foreign policy chief. So he's referring to Joseph Borrell here, and I think just making a mistake. Let's see.
Everybody agreed. Israel's using starvation as a method of war.
No, not everyone agreed.
Okay? Now, it's not easy to use starvation as a method of war. You have to seal all their points of entry. You have to blow up food banks in Gaza in order to make that work.
Okay, let's look at the further analysis here. So Human Rights Watch had already made the allegation in December 2023. On 18th of December 2023, Human Rights Watch published an investigation titled Israel Starvation Used as a Weapon of War in Gaza. Its conclusion was explicit. HRW Human Rights Watch said the Israeli government was using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and characterized that as a war crime. HRW based its assessment on restrictions on food, water, fuel, humanitarian assistance, agricultural areas, and other objects indispensable to civilian survival, combined with public statements by senior Israeli officials. So the legal characterization existed months before mid-2024. Oxfam was saying essentially the same thing by March 2024. On the 18th of March 2024, Oxfam stated that Israel had been using starvation as a weapon of war. Oxfam linked the conclusion to restrictions on food and humanitarian aid and described the deprivation as deliberate. Then after the June IPC assessment, Oxfam reiterated on June 25th, 2024, that Israel was deliberately using starvation as a weapon of war. The ICJ established the catastrophic starvation conditions, but did not itself find the starvation war crime. This distinction is crucial. In March 2024, the International Court of Justice found that Gaza's humanitarian situation had deteriorated catastrophically and ordered Israel to ensure without delay the provision of urgently needed humanitarian assistance. Several judges emphasized the impediments to aid had produced unprecedented hunger and starvation. 4 judges wrote that Israeli military operations had resulted in unprecedented levels of starvation and collapse of essential civilian infrastructure. President Salam's declaration noted that children had already died of starvation and quoted Borrell's, quote, weapon of war accusation. But we must preserve the institutional boundary. The ICJ as a court did not adjudicate that Netanyahu, Gallant, or Israel had committed the Rome Statute war crime of intentionally using starvation as a method of warfare. Its proceeding concerned the Genocide Convention, and these were provisional measures. So it is legitimate evidence of the underlying deprivation and Israel's obligations, but shouldn't be citation laundered into an ICC-style criminal finding. The ICC prosecutor explicitly alleged the starvation war crime in May 2024. This is perhaps the strongest legal evidence available within Finkelstein's claimed time period. On May 20th, 2024, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan announced that he was applying for arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. He said that based on evidence collected and examined by his office, he had reasonable grounds to believe they bore criminal responsibility for crimes including starvation of civilians as a method of war. His office alleged a common plan that systematically deprived Gaza's civilian population of objects indispensable to survival. That is almost exactly Finkelstein's proposition, but there is a procedural correction to the original report. This is our original claim report. Our original C57, claim 57, leaned on S5, the November 2025 ICC warrants. That's not ideal because Finkelstein specifically says this was already being reported in mid-2024. The proper contemporaneous source is May 20th, 2024, ICC prosecutor's warrant application, not 21st of November 2024 ICC judge's eventual warrant decision. Okay, that'll be important information for the final audit of the data. This is a genuine instance of temporal contamination from our first report, albeit one that does not change the underlying conclusion. The November warrants are later corroboration, not the correct source for what was known in mid-2024. That right there is demonstration of the aliveness of the Pangburn system, analysis system we use to get a clear, solid picture of what the facts actually are. It is constantly trying to update, see where there might be a more accurate depiction in favor of the claims that are being made in the transcript. The UN Commission of Inquiry independently found weaponization of basic necessities. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry's 2024 investigation examined Israel's, quote, total siege. It documented the October 9th cutoff of food, water, fuel, electricity, and movement of goods, and concluded that statements and conduct indicated an intention to instrumentalize and weaponize life-sustaining necessity to achieve military and political objectives. Later UN reporting summarized the commission as concluding that Israel had weaponized the withholding of necessities and described starvation as a method of war. Again, that does not mean, quote, the UN in some monolithic sense convicted Israel, but it adds another independent institutional strand supporting Finkelstein's underlying assertion. Gutierrez himself came extremely close. But we have not found the exact, quote, method of war formulation from him. On March 18th, 2024, Gutierrez called the imminent famine an entirely man-made disaster and described Gaza's population as enduring horrifying hunger. On April 5th, 2024, he said Gaza was on the brink of mass starvation and that humanitarian access restrictions had to end. He also said that Israeli military campaign had brought relentless death and destruction, and that respect for international humanitarian law was in tatters. Those are very serious statements, but we have not located a primary Gutierrez statement from that period explicitly making the criminal intent proposition. Quote, Israel is using starvation as a method of war. Yeah, and everyone agreed is definitely not literally true. Israel, of course, did not agree. On the very day of Khan's May 2024 announcement, Israel's foreign minister called his accusations baseless and unfounded and maintained that Israel was acting consistently with international humanitarian law and facilitating humanitarian assistance by land, sea, and air. Netanyahu likewise rejected Khan's allegations and said Israel was taking measures to get civilians out of harm's way and to ensure humanitarian assistance reached Gaza. Israel's COGAT also disputed some IPC methodology and argued that Israel was substantially facilitating food and humanitarian aid while distribution problems, looting, Hamas activity, and operational constraints contributed to shortages. The United States also rejected the ICC prosecutor's application, raising jurisdictional, complementary, and procedural objections. Therefore, as a literal empirical proposition, everybody agreed is false. There was also significant disagreement concerning Israeli intent, causal responsibility, legal jurisdiction, the starvation war crime elements, and the adequacy of Israeli facilitatory efforts. So that part by Finkelstein is just false. It's not this everyone agreed situation. Even some neutral humanitarian bodies stop short of making the criminal intent finding. This is another reason not to convert catastrophic hunger consensus into starvation war crime consensus. The World Food Program documented catastrophic food insecurity and severe Israeli access constraints, and in March 2024 warned famine was imminent in northern Gaza. But the WFP materials cited here does not itself render a criminal finding that Israeli leaders intended starvation as a method of war. Likewise, the ICRC states the legal rule that starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited, but determining that a particular actor has committed that war crime requires evidence of the necessary conduct and intent. So there really were two different levels of consensus. Very broad consensus that Gaza was suffering catastrophic hunger, aid access was grossly inadequate, and Israeli restrictions/military operations were major contributors. Substantial but not universal agreement with regards to Israel was intentionally employing starvation as a method of warfare. So Finkelstein collapses those two levels together. So the evidence for intent was not merely people were hungry. This matters because starvation as a method of warfare is considerably stronger than merely saying war caused food scarcity. The argument made by HRW, Human Rights Watch, and later the ICC prosecutor relied on a combination of the announced, quote, complete siege, interruptions and restrictions concerning food, water, fuel, and electricity, restrictions on humanitarian access, obstruction of relief, damage to objects indispensable to civilian survival, duration and scale, and statements by senior officials linking deprivation to military or hostage-related objectives. UN commissions similarly focused on the alleged instrumentalization of necessities to achieve strategic goals rather than simply observing malnutrition. This is why serious legal bodies could reach the starvation method allegation even without an IPC famine declaration. But Israel has meaningful counterarguments that must remain in the record. Israel's principal countercase is that the October 7th attack created extraordinary military conditions. Hamas damaged or attacked crossings. Hamas operated among civilian infrastructure. Israel progressively expanded aid entry. Israeli authorities coordinated land, sea, and air assistance. Internal distribution failures and looting reduced what reached civilians. And conduct aimed at increasing aid is inconsistent with an intention to starve civilians. A group of former military officials submitted an amicus-style assessment arguing that their inspection of Israeli operations demonstrated a genuine ongoing effort to alleviate Gaza's humanitarian conditions and was consistent with the prosecutor's starvation intent theory. Inconsistent with the prosecutor's starvation intent theory. That assessment was hosted by Israel and should therefore be treated as a defense-oriented submission rather than neutral adjudication. But its substantive evidence cannot simply be ignored. Whether those measures negate earlier intent, represent mitigation after pressure, or coexist with unlawful restrictions is precisely part of the contested merits question. Again, this is something the ICJ will almost certainly adjudicate and weigh in on. So there's a lot here. by mid-2024, there was substantial multi-institutional support for the underlying allegation that starvation was being used as a method of war. Human Rights Watch explicitly accused Israel of using civilian starvation as a method of war in December 2023. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said at the UN Security Council in March 2024 that, quote, starvation is being used as a weapon of war. Oxfam made the same allegation. The UN Commission of Inquiry found that Israel weaponized the provision of life-sustaining necessities. And on May 20th, 2024, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan said he had reasonable grounds to believe Netanyahu and Gallant bore criminal responsibility for starvation of civilians as a method of war. Qualification, quote, everybody agreed is an inaccurate universal. Israel explicitly rejected the allegations and presented evidence of aid facilitation. The United States rejected the ICC prosecutor's action, and humanitarian bodies such as IPC and WFP documented catastrophic hunger without necessarily making the same criminal intent finding. Legal stage correction. In mid-2024, the relevant ICC development was Prosecutor Khan's arrest warrant application based on his asserted reasonable grounds. The ICC judges did not issue the Netanyahu-Gallant warrants until November 2024. Neither stage constitutes a criminal conviction. Okay, that was a lot, but important to get that stuff right. Let me just double check. For those of you who are on X, really helps the stream if you share the post. And if anyone feels like dropping me a super chat, I will answer any of your questions or investigate anything you send my way. Okay. Shall we? Okay, that was a lot there.
The whole Israeli army was implicated. And you know what? You know who you're trying to starve? 1.1 million of those 2.3 million Gazans are children.
Yeah.
You are concretely implicated, or to use your word, complicitous in starving children. Okay, guys.
Okay, so that hasn't been adjudicated by international court.
You lost me. If I meet somebody in the street or at the beach, because I'm right near Coney Island Beach, and the person says, I'm from Gaza, I'm from Israel, I walk away, won't talk.
So if they're a Jew from Israel, he won't talk. He won't talk to them. So this is a more softer serve, hinting at anti-Semitism than what happened earlier in this video.
You lost me. So to get back to your original question.
Again, I'm a little bit too woke for this, and only because it's interesting. I had a very similar, well, not on this issue, but
I'm not proud of, I'm not happy with what I'm saying. On the other hand, I think a line has been crossed, because I said to you earlier.
By who, Norm? All the Jews? That's what you implied earlier in this video.
There are things that I agree with what you said. I'm just saying that I have a more optimistic perspective in terms of changing people's minds.
Right. I said to you earlier, there are a couple of misconceptions about Gaza. And I said, one of them is it's a war. And I said there was a second and I said, my mind slipped, but I know it'll come back to me. The second misconception is, as you know, even people like Bernie Sanders, who I like, just like I like Brad Landler, I don't have the litmus test sort of thing. Are you a Zionist? Are you now, or have you ever been a Zionist? I'm not too caught up on the litmus tests. I want to see a general picture. And in general, Bernie was horrible the first month, horrible the second month, but then he turned around, whether it was public, whether it was because he saw public opinion. He wasn't bad afterwards, except for one thing, which is I'm going to get to now, and which will probably is why you're expressing reservations. And that was the question of who's the problem.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
And it's not Netanyahu.
No, it's not. I know. I'm just.
Yes, I understand, and we're on the same wavelength. It's not Netanyahu. As I've said over and over again, the problem is not the Israeli state. The problem is the Israeli society. Those folks
in Israeli society
have gone mad. They are psychotic in their relish at
So it is true that not all folks in Israeli society are Jews, but a very large portion of them are.
the death and destruction in Gaza. The problem is Israeli society. So you may say you're woke, so you're against these generalizations.
No. I just meant I believe
Israel calls
I believe that you can
itself,
still change someone's mind.
Israel calls itself
Finkelstein doesn't like to let Hasan get a word in here.
the state of the Jewish people. And the problem is the Jewish people of Israel are mad.
The Jewish people of Israel are mad. All of them. So this is equivalent, in my view, of saying the black people of the United States are mad.
The kinds of relish they express at the death and destruction in Gaza. To me,
They in this situation is referring to the Jews of Israel. Let's go back a little bit.
the problem is the Israeli society. Those folks have gone mad. They are psychotic in their relish at the death and destruction in Gaza. The problem is Israeli society. So you may say you're woke, so you're against these generalizations.
No. I just meant I believe I believe that you can still change someone's mind.
Israel calls itself the state of the Jewish people. And the problem is the Jewish people of Israel are mad. The kinds of relish.
So Finkelstein says the Jewish people of Israel are mad and attributes to them a collective condition like being psychotic or taking relish in death and destruction. This is no longer merely criticism of Israeli policy. It is a sweeping negative generalization about a Jewish population as a Jewish population. The same structure applied to another group. For example, quote, black people in America have gone mad, would ordinarily be recognized as a racist generalization rather than a precise criticism of particular individuals, institutions, or political attitudes. The distinction is important because the transcript shows a movement from criticizing, quote, Israeli society to making claims about Jews collectively. Our own working audit already identified, quote, actor aggregation and collective claims about Jews or Israelis as one of Finkelstein's reoccurring evidentiary problems. Under the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, which was expressly designed in part to avoid conflating legitimate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is prejudice, hostility, discrimination, or violence against Jews as Jews. It also states very plainly that it is racist to essentialize a population or make sweeping negative generalizations about it, and that the same principle applies specifically to Jews. The IHRA framework points in the same direction. It distinguishes ordinary criticism of Israel from anti-Semitism, but identifies dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as a collective as anti-Semitic. The Nexus definition likewise treats the attribution of collective culpability or negative traits to Jews as anti-Semitic. So compare these two statements. Empirical and permissible criticism. Quote, a January 2024 survey found 43.4% of Jewish Israelis thought the IDF was using too little force. This is a defined population, a defined question, a date, and a measurable result. It can be criticized, contextualized, or compared. Versus, the Jewish people in Israel have gone mad. They are psychotic in their relish for death and destruction. That second formulation does something very different. It takes political attitudes held by some or even many members of a population and converts them into a collective psychological and moral pathology of, quote, the Jewish people. It would be equally improper to reason crime statistics involving some Black Americans leads to, quote, Black Americans are violent. Islamist polling among some Muslims leads to Muslims are deranged. Russian support for the Ukraine war leads to Russian people are psychotic. Jewish-Israeli hawkish polling leads to Jewish people are mad and relish killing. The data may justify statements about measured attitudes. They do not justify essentializing the group. There's one caveat worth keeping. If someone says something like, quote, Jewish Israeli public opinion has become radically hawkish or morally desensitized during the war, and then supports that with defining polling, that is not automatically anti-Semitic. Quote, Jewish Israeli can be a legitimate demographic category in survey research. The line is crossed when the demographic category becomes the bearer of an undifferentiated negative essence. Quote, the Jewish people are mad, psychotic, relish death. This is collective ethnic religious denomination. So the classification here is this is anti-Semitic collective generalization. This is anti-Semitism, what it looks like. Criticism of Israeli society or of documented Jewish Israeli public opinion is not inherently anti-Semitic. However, Finkelstein shifts from criticizing, quote, Israeli society to attributing madness, psychosis, and enjoyment of death to the Jewish people in Israel. That converts political criticism into a sweeping negative characterization of a Jewish population. Mainstream definitions that deliberately protect legitimate criticism of Israel, including the Jerusalem Declaration, nevertheless identify this kind of ethnic essentialization and collective negative generalization as anti-Semitic. So, to summarize, Finkelstein is being anti-Semitic here. This is just direct evidence. More evidence. We had more evidence earlier. And that's awful. That's a horrible way to think, a horrible way of being. It's wrongful and bad.
They express at the death and destruction in Gaza. To me, I have to tell you, and I've said this, and maybe it's an idiosyncrasy of mine. There was a great historian once. His name was Arnold Toynbee, okay? And he once wrote this history of humanity. I guess he got through like 15 volumes and then he passed. And when he came to discuss Israel and Zionism, he said that the Zionists have created a new Jewish psychophysical type. The Israeli Jews, they're not Jews. I know that will come as kind of paradoxical.
No.
But they're not
I
Jews.
Understand what you're
when
saying.
I was growing up, you know what a Jew was?
What?
A Jew was, but they're not Jews.
I understand what you're
when
saying.
I was growing up, you know what? So you're against these generalizations.
No. I just meant, I believe
Israel calls
I believe that you can
itself,
still change someone's mind.
Israel calls itself the state of the Jewish people. And the problem is the Jewish people of Israel are mad. The kinds of relish they express at the death and destruction in Gaza. To me, I have to tell you.
Group attribution, anti-Semitism.
And I've said this, and maybe it's an idiosyncrasy of mine. There was a great historian once. His name was Arnold Toynbee, okay? And he once wrote this history of humanity. I guess he got through like 15 volumes and then he passed. And when he came to discuss Israel and Zionism, he said that the Zionists have created a new Jewish psychophysical type. The Israeli Jews, they're not Jews. I know that will come as kind of paradoxical.
No.
But
Psychophysical type. We're going to do a deep dive into this section.
They're not Jews.
I understand what you're
when
saying.
I was growing up, you know what a Jew was?
Hasan understands what he is saying.
A Jew was somebody who was smart, read a lot, was creative, culturally creative, and physically kind of feeble. There were a few Jewish sports.
Is he going through the anti-Semitic stereotypes here?
But they're not
I
Jews.
understand what you're
when
saying.
I was growing up, you know what a Jew was? A Jew was somebody who was smart, read a lot, was creative, culturally creative, and physically kind of feeble.
These are anti-Semitic stereotypes. What the fuck is going on here? Oh yeah, here we go. This is maddening. And Hasan is just like nodding along with this. I'm going to see if Hasan corrects any of this. So the claim was the Zionists have created a new Jewish psychophysical type. The Israeli Jews, they're not Jews. I know that will come as kind of paradoxical, but they're not Jews, he says. He then explains what he means. You know, growing up, he says, a Jew was someone who was smart, read a lot, culturally creative, and physically feeble or scrawny. He invokes Kafka and Woody Allen as examples and concludes, The Israeli type is totally alien to what it was in my generation to be a Jew. This is a really scary stuff. And I guess a lot of you are going to be like, well, haven't you been hearing this guy going around? Like, no, it's just, it hasn't been on my radar with the work I've been doing in the past year and a half, couple of years. So Israeli Jews are not Jews. That's just obviously false. There's no mainstream demographic, religious, sociological, or self-identification standard under which Israeli Jews collectively cease to be Jews merely by becoming Israeli. Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics formally records millions of Israeli residents as Jewish by religion, population classification. Its population tables explicitly contain a category for Jews distinct from Muslims, Christians, and Druze. More importantly, Israeli Jews overwhelmingly understand themselves as members of the Jewish people. Pew's major study of Israeli Jewish identity found 93% were proud to be Jewish. 88% felt a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people. Strong Jewish identification persisted among secular, traditional, religious, and ultra-Orthodox Israelis. Israeli Jews differ enormously over what Jewishness means: religion, ancestry, culture, nationality, ethics, observance, etc. But that diversity does not make them not Jews. God, this is so anti-Semitic. Wow. Quite shocking, honestly. And this is a mainstream streamer who's having this guy on and gave him a litany of praise before they began this discussion. So obviously that's a false claim. So Finkelstein's own examples here are stereotypes, not criteria of Jewishness. His description: smart, reads a lot, creative, physically feeble equals Jew, has serious empirical problems. Israeli Jews include, and this is what happens with anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, is the targeted group becomes this monolith. When I think of a Jew, Travis, when I think of a Jew, they are smart, reads a lot, creative, physically feeble, intelligence, penny pincher, like this kind of stuff, equal to Jew. When Israeli Jews include Ashkenazi, Mizrahim, I think it is, Sephardim, Ethiopian Jews, Jews from the former Soviet Union, secular Jews, traditional Jews, religious Zionists, Haredim, innumerable cultural combinations of different things. Pew found Israeli Jews themselves sharply divide over the meaning of Jewish identity. Only 16%, for example, regard intellectual curiosity as essential to Jewish identity, while larger shares emphasized Holocaust remembrance, ethics, religion, ancestry, or culture. Finkelstein is taking characteristics associated with one historical cultural image, largely the intellectual Ashkenazi diaspora Jew of the milieu in which he grew up, and universalizing them into what a Jew is. That is sociologically indefensible. There's an irony here. Finkelstein's argument partly reproduces the very stereotypes that Zionism's, quote, new Jew project was reacting against. The older stereotype was diaspora Jew equals cerebral, weak, bookish, physically unimpressive. Some early Zionists accepted much of the characterization and wanted to replace it with new Jew equals physically strong, productive, agricultural, sovereign, and capable of armed self-defense. Finkelstein effectively reverses the normative evaluation. The allegedly bookish, scrawny diaspora type was authentically Jewish. The muscular Israeli type is alien and therefore not Jewish. But both approaches risk turning historically contingent stereotypes into an ethnic essence. The sentence itself, Israeli Jews aren't Jews, isn't stereotypically anti-Semitic in the conventional sense of alleging that Jews are greedy, conspiratorial, evil, etc. But his reasoning is unmistakably ethnic essentialism. He defines authentic Jewishness using stereotype, psychological, and physical traits and excludes millions of Jews who do not conform to this preferred archetype. That becomes especially problematic in conjunction with what he had just said about Israeli Jews being mad, psychotic, and taking relish in Gaza's destruction. The sequence becomes Israeli Jewish people possess a pathological collective psychology. They don't resemble authentic Jews. Authentic Jews are smart, creative, nerdy, and physically feeble. Therefore, modern Israeli Jews are effectively no longer really Jews. We could characterize this as prejudicial Jewish essentialism and identify delegitimization. Calling it anti-Semitic stereotyping is defensible as well. Yeah, I think, because it assigns stereotypical psychological, physical characteristics to Jews as the essence of authentic Jewishness. Yeah, I think it's anti-Semitic. Finkelstein introduces the argument about the Toynbee attribution. Finkelstein introduces the argument by saying Arnold Toynbee wrote that Zionists had created a new Jewish psychological type. Toynbee unquestionably held highly critical views of Zionism and made arguments contrasting Zionism with what he considered authentic Jewish religious or diaspora existence. He even publicly equated Zionism and anti-Semitism in important aspects. It doesn't look like we've been able to locate the original Toynbee passage containing Finkelstein's exact, quote, new Jewish psychophysical type wording. So that one I'm going to flag for the final audit. See if we can find that. Okay. Israeli Jews are Jews under ordinary demographic, religious, ethnic, and self-identification usage. Israeli surveys show overwhelming identification with and belonging to the Jewish people. Finkelstein subsequently clarifies that he is employing an idiosyncratic cultural definition of Jew based on the intellectual, creative, and physically weak Ashkenazi diaspora archetype of his youth. That stereotype is not a valid criterion of Jewish identity. Scholarship does not support his narrower historical premise that Zionism consciously sought to construct a culturally and physically transformed, quote, new Jew or Sabra, but cultural transformation does not imply loss of Jewish identity. Yeah, this is anti-Semitic.
There were a few Jewish sports heroes like Hank Greenberg. Again, the names will come back.
Adam Friedland.
No. A few, but in general, Jews were seen as being kind of scrawny, physically feeble. And so you think of a Jew, Franz Kafka, with the big ears, the high forehead. The classic one of my generation was, of course, Woody Allen. He was nerdy, very creative, he played an instrument, he acted, he was a writer, a comedian, a director. That was a Jew for us. The Israeli type is totally alien to what it was in my generation to be a Jew. So I don't even consider, if Israel called itself, believe me, if you want to solve the problem of anti-Semitism in the world, 95, not the full part, because Jews do exercise disproportionate power, wealth, and so forth, and that will always be a problem for Jews. But 95% of the problem would be eliminated if Israel just called itself the state of the Nazi people. It'll be over. Just drop the Jewish part. And a lot
state of the Nazi people. Wow. So the claim 95% of the anti-Semitism problem would disappear if Israel stopped calling itself Jewish. This is an untestable counterfactual percentage with no model or data. Israeli policy may influence anti-Semitic discourse, but it cannot support a precise 95% causal estimate. So, without data, without like any further demonstration being made, like he just pulled this number out of his ass. That's like someone just saying like 95, just pulling it out of their ass. 95% of the world would agree with me that Shakespeare in Love is the greatest movie of all time. So I'd be like, yeah, how did you come to that number? You just have to think about it, dude. That's kind of what's going on here. Where does he get the 95% number? And it also just shows, again, he doesn't understand anti-Semitism, which is strange for someone that has apparently studied. I wonder how he studies, by the way. We're going to do a deeper adjudication of that claim and section. Of the... Did he really just say of the Nazi people? What did he say?
But they're not Jews.
I understand what you're
when
saying.
I was growing up, but they're not.
And this attitude, I think, is carried by a lot of American Jews.
Well, I don't.
The stupid thing doesn't let me go back to like... Okay.
And this attitude, I think, is carried by a lot of American Jews.
Well, I don't care very much what it means to you. You can.
No, I'm not saying it means to me.
Right, but
I'm saying,
they can say whatever it means to them. I just want you to take a stand on one question.
We are doing a deeper dive into that claim. Just change the name of just stop calling Israel Jewish, then all of a sudden the group attribution, all of the other anti-Semitic things are just going to go away. 95% of it. That's a ridiculous claim. Ridiculous. So does Israel materially contribute to contemporary anti-Semitism? There's a supported core here. There's substantial empirical evidence that events involving Israel can trigger anti-Semitic hostility toward Jews outside Israel. Well, and we've seen some of this anti-Semitic hostility from Finkelstein and Hasan in this video. The EU Agency for Fundamental Rights surveyed nearly 8,000 Jews across 13 EU countries in 2023. 75% said that they felt people held them responsible for actions of the Israeli government because they were Jewish. FRA also explicitly says its research has repeatedly found that anti-Semitism rises during periods of heightened Middle East tension. So, quote, Israel has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, would not be supported by the evidence. A defensible statement would be Israeli military actions and Israeli-Palestinian conflicts can substantially increase anti-Semitic incidents abroad because some people incorrectly transfer hostility toward Israel onto Jews generally. So again, this should not be the case. It should not be the case that when Israeli military actions occur and there's an ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that should not increase anti-Semitic incidents abroad because people are incorrectly transferring hostility toward Israel onto Jews generally. That shouldn't happen. That's bad. That's anti-Semitism. You shouldn't want to be anti-Semitic. That shouldn't be viewed as a good thing or a righteous thing in your mind. Very, very, very quick bathroom break. Very quick. Make sure you smash that like button, share the stream, all that good stuff. All righty then. You wouldn't believe how many times I've been asked by going through these fact checks of Dave's video first and then this video, you know, are you a Jew? Are you a Jew? Are you a Jew? Are you a Jew? And also, I mean, just today I've been called a Nazi, I think 5 times in 5 different comments on social media, which is pretty crazy for someone who's just engaging in fact checking and giving my moral well-beingist normative opinions. People throw that word around, man, like it means nothing. So obviously we don't need to go through why it's ridiculous. Okay, well, actually, yeah, we should. So does this justify Norm Finkelstein's claim that 95% of anti-Semitism would be wiped off the, face of the earth? If Israel stopped calling itself a Jewish state or Jewish. Does that justify 95%? No, that's unsupported, and available data strongly cuts against it. So this idea 95% of global anti-Semitism is caused by Israel describing itself as Jewish. There's an even more basic methodological problem. Finkelstein's proposed intervention isn't Israel stops a particular military operation. It is apparently Israel continues to exist, but stops calling itself the Jewish state, or rhetorically calls itself the, quote, state of Nazi people. I still can't believe he said that. Of all the things you could call yourself as a state, given the history, state of Nazi people? What an insensitive, ridiculous, simple-minded thing to say. Like, maybe if you're going to push this, state of Nazi people would probably be the last thing I think this state should be called. I'm not sure that that's going to be a very popular suggestion there, Norm. There is no natural experiment remotely resembling this counterfactual from which a 95% causal effect could be estimated. An actual incident data point nowhere near 95%. United States, 58%, not 95%. ADL recorded 9,354 U.S. anti-Semitic incidents in 2024. It classified 58% as containing an Israel or Zionism-related element. Therefore, approximately 42% did not. ADL explicitly says ordinary criticism of Israel or ordinary anti-Israel activism does not count as an anti-Semitic incident in its audit. Now, 58% is not a causal estimate. We cannot say Israel, quote, caused 58% simply because Israel-related language appeared. But it establishes something important. Even using an organization whose methodology captures a large amount of Israel-related anti-Semitism, nowhere near 95% of recorded anti-Semitic incidents even contained an Israel-Zionism element. And there were 962 U.S. incidents involving white supremacist anti-Semitic propaganda in 2024. A sneeze. Including classic conspiracy claims concerning Jewish control, 9/11, blood libel, and other themes that plainly cannot be reduced to Israel merely describing itself as Jewish. The UK evidence is even more damaging to the 95% estimate. CST recorded 3,522 anti-Semitic incidents in Britain in 2024. Of these, 1,844, 52%, contained rhetoric related to Israel-Palestine, October 7th, or the war. Approximately 48% did not. A CST's methodology is relatively useful here because it expressly says that an expression such as, quote, free Palestine is not counted as anti-Semitic merely for being anti-Israel. Israel-related incidents still require anti-Jewish language, motivation, or targeting. There's an even stronger comparison. UK 2022, no major Israel war trigger. CST recorded 1,662 anti-Semitic incidents. Only 15% contained Israel-related discourse. Therefore, approximately 85% did not. That doesn't prove Israel contributed nothing indirectly, but it is extremely difficult to reconcile with, quote, 95% of the anti-Semitism problem disappears if Israel changes its Jewish identification. A society with no major Middle East trigger that year still generated more than 1,600 recorded incidents, with the overwhelming majority lacking Israel-related content. There is also evidence of reverse causality. This is particularly important. Finkelstein's implicit causal model looks like Israel leads to hostility towards Israel, leads to anti-Semitism. That pathway certainly exists, but peer-reviewed research indicates another pathway. Pre-existing anti-Semitism leads to hostility toward Israel. A 2024 article in the Journal of European Economic Association examined social media and German survey data and found a strong relationship between anti-Semitic beliefs and anti-Israel attitudes. Its instrumental variable analyzes supported its instrumental variable analysis supported a causal interpretation in which anti-Semitic prejudice itself contributes to negative attitudes toward Israel. So causation can run in both directions. That makes the claim such as, quote, 95% of anti-Semitism originates because Israel calls itself Jewish, even less defensible. So apparent, quote, anti-Israel anti-Semitism may actually represent old anti-Jewish prejudice attaching itself to a modern political object. History poses an enormous problem for the 95% thesis. Anti-Semitism preceded Israel political Zionism, the Balfour Declaration, modern Jewish nationalism by many centuries. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum describes anti-Jewish prejudice as persisting for more than 2,000 years, encompassing Christian deicide accusations, blood libel, religious persecution, expulsions, pogroms, economic stereotypes, conspiracy theories concerning Jewish wealth and control, racial anti-Semitism, and ultimately Nazi extermination ideology. All existed before the State of Israel was created in 1948. That doesn't mean modern Israel cannot create new triggers for an ancient prejudice. It clearly can. But it demonstrates that there are deeply established anti-Semitic belief systems causally independent of Israel's current self-description. So the 95% thing is just completely ridiculous.
Do you believe that Jews should have superior rights to non-Jews in the state of Israel, for that matter, anywhere else? And then you say Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. Fine. I don't really agree with that, but if that's what you believe, that's fine. For me, that's an ideological question. It's not a political question. Mm-hmm. You can believe whatever you want. But on the practical political question, do you think there should be a state which privileges one ethnic group over another? And that to me is the way Mamdani handled it, and I thought it was correct. It was very well done.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Let's see. So I wanted to talk to you, and thank you. This has been 3 hours now that we've been talking. I know you brought up, I think you said you had a conversation with Candace Owens for
2 hours and 45 minutes.
Okay, well, we've passed that point.
Candace Owens, I'll tell you one thing I was impressed by.
You were impressed by Candace Owens?
She has absolutely limitless energy.
Okay.
Do you know when we got off the interview, she was still after me about Freud and what a pervert he was and how a child molester. So I was very impressed by her reserves of sheer physical energy.
Yeah. So you sat down with Candace Owens, you discussed your books. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because I don't know if you saw this, but she was waving around the copy of the Talmudic Jew. Mm-hmm. And she is very anti-Semitic. And what's actually kind of ironic about this, maybe you'll appreciate the irony here, is that Candace Owens, as well as Nick Fuentes, actually got a lot of their early notes. And Candace Owens' career is entirely concocted by David Horowitz and then later Ben Shapiro, two very conservative Jewish Americans. Mm-hmm. David Horowitz, former Trotskyist turned Islamophobe neocon, and Ben Shapiro is also obviously very, very pro-Israel. And what I've always found interesting is that
we're going to look at Candace Owens' apparent anti-Semitism since it was brought up here.
Candace Owens was anti-Semitic before she got hired at the Daily Wire. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't a problem for Ben. But she only got fired from the Daily Wire because she was anti-Semitic and had become anti-Israel. This obviously feeds into the growing American anti-Semitic.
We'll also adjudicate that. What was she fired for? In March 2024, Owens speculated about a small Jewish, quote, gang or ring in Hollywood using Jewish identity to shield itself while allegedly engaging in blackmail, control, and other wrongdoing. The full passage shows she tried to restrict the accusation to a subset rather than Jews generally, which is relevant mitigation. But the framing still closely resembles classic conspiracy narratives about covert Jewish networks controlling entertainment and silencing critics. She also described, quote, political Jews as a small faction of, quote, vile, dishonest, manipulative people who actually create anti-Semitism. Again, she explicitly said she was not talking about all Jews, so this is not equivalent to saying Jews are manipulative, but attributing anti-Semitism substantially to Jewish misconduct is historically loaded and becomes more concerning when combined with her other conspiracy claims. A much clearer episode occurred when Owens publicly liked a post asking a rabbi whether he was, quote, drunk on Christian blood again. That invokes the historic blood libel, the false accusation that Jews murdered Christians for ritual blood. A social media, quote, like is weaker evidence than an authored statement. It can theoretically be impulsive or misunderstood, but in context, it is straightforward evidence of endorsing or approving explicitly anti-Semitic imagery. The case became considerably stronger after 2024. The ADL has documented Owens promoting theories about secret Jewish or Jewish derived networks controlling Hollywood, psychiatry, pornography, and other institutions, alleging that modern Jews are actually, quote, pagan gypsies masquerading as Jews, promoting claims about a Khazarian mafia, and warning listeners about Shabbat communities as dangerous. Wow. Because the ADL is an advocacy organization, I would not, we shouldn't treat its characterization alone as dispositive, but several of the underlying statements are tied to Owens' own broadcasts and posts. There's also evidence against making the label too casually. Owens repeatedly distinguishes Jews from Zionists, says she has Jewish friends and viewers. Well, that's not really, it's not really going to qualify you away from anti-Semitism, and has stated that she is criticizing particular political actors rather than Jews as a whole. Her opposition to Israeli military policy, foreign aid, Netanyahu, or Zionism is not inherently anti-Semitic. Some early accusations against her therefore relied too heavily on interpreting severe anti-Israel criticism as anti-Jewish prejudice. So here's the clean formulation. Candace Owens has repeatedly expressed and amplified rhetoric that fits mainstream definitions of anti-Semitism, particularly conspiracy claims concerning covert Jewish power, collective Jewish manipulation, blood libel imagery, and sweeping allegations about Jewish religious or ethnic groups. Her criticism of Israel and Zionism is not itself evidence of anti-Semitism, and some individual dispute remarks have plausible non-anti-Semitic readings. The classification is supported by the cumulative pattern rather than by opposition to Israel alone. Okay, well, the pattern does say that she is anti-Semitic or engages in anti-Semitism. So a mistake people might make, Candace Owens criticizes Israel, therefore she is anti-Semitic. That would be false reasoning. But Candace Owens has repeatedly promoted anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy narratives. That is supported. High confidence that that is supported. Was she fired from Daily Wire for being anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, etc.? Owens split from the Daily Wire followed months of conflict over Israel, but available evidence does not establish that she was terminated merely for opposing Israel. Daily Wire leadership had previously said she would not be fired for disagreeing about Israel. By the time of her March 2024 departure, the controversy had expanded to rhetoric about Jews that Daily Wire figures explicitly characterized as anti-Semitic. The company itself never publicly disclosed a formal termination reason.
Semitic movement, one that goes from the, I guess, nascent anti-Semitism, stereotyping of Jews. I jokingly refer to it as, most Americans who don't live in these major cities where a lot of Jewish people live in have this attitude where it's like, yeah, Jews control the media, but I like Seinfeld. It's very funny. Or, Jews control the banking system, but they're very good with money, and I want my accountant to be a Jewish
true.
guy. So that's normally the attitude. But all of a sudden,
I know many Muslims who absolutely demand a Jewish lawyer.
Yeah. So, but what becomes a problem that nascent.
He knows many Muslims that demand a Jewish lawyer. I would like to see a demonstration of that. Maybe it's true. But I haven't found Norm Finkelstein to be someone who is representing the truth of what is going on in reality, the facts. So,
attitude of stereotyping of Jews becomes a problem when all of a sudden that level of power is, from the eyes of the majority, that level of power is being used to silence dissent, to speak out against critics of Israel, and to purchase media properties, as the Ellisons are doing currently, to turn them into more pro-Trump and more pro-Israel outlets, which is laughable because they were already super pro-Israel. That is, I think, our point of agreement. But I wanted to hear what your perspective is on Candace Owens in particular, as someone who is, like, I think you and I both agree, very anti-Semitic, who's also mentioned in the dual anti-Semitism condemnation bill that I.
Yeah, I mean, the irony about this is the anti-Semitism that Candace Owens engages in, that I've been able to find, the general picture of it is the same kind of crap I've been hearing in this conversation. So maybe Hasan believes himself to be anti-Semitic. I'm sure he probably wouldn't happily wear that label, but it's the same kind of stuff comparatively that's been going on in this video in comparison to the things we just read about Candace Owens.
I was on, where they put me and Candace Owens side by side to try to apply pressure to the platforms that have me on, that claim that I'm anti-Semitic as well as her.
First of all, as a general rule, I have to be serious about this, and I suspect you'll be serious too. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Candace Owens had me on her program twice, and just as a factual matter, I was, with one exception, for 10 minutes. I was never on even Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera blacklisted me. 3 years. I think it's acknowledged that I'm the world's leading academic authority on Gaza.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope he is not the world's leading academic authority on Gaza. That's terrifying. Why did Al Jazeera blacklist
The entire network blacklisted me. And mainstream media in the U.S. asked me, was I on one network program? No. Television network program? No. Was I on any liberal podcast? No. It was just a handful, a very small handful. So I have to be careful just out of pure, propriety.
Yeah.
She had me on. She had me on twice. And she let me speak. There were moments where I significantly disagreed with her, and I was able to say what I wanted. Now, on the question of anti-Semitism, I'll be, fancy word, nuanced. And you can disagree with me or agree with me. I don't consider Candace Owens a political menace. She carries around prejudices about Jews. As I say, everybody carries around prejudices about everybody, okay? The question is not...
No, it's not the case that everybody carries around prejudices about everybody. And to equate, what may be emotional knee-jerk reaction thoughts and what might be prejudices at that level, to equate that with what Candace Owens is doing or what you guys have been doing in this podcast is a category error.
Whether a person carries prejudices.
Finkelstein states that Al Jazeera blacklisted him for approximately 3 years, but no independent documentation of a formal or informal blacklist, its dates, decision makers, or rationale was located. Al Jazeera has historically featured Finkelstein prominently, including interviews in 2005 and 2014/15, and multiple Al Jazeera English appearances in 2004 and 2005. His opposition to BDS did substantially alienate parts of the Palestine solidarity movement, and Al Jazeera published criticism of his BDS position, making political estrangement a plausible hypothesis, but Al Jazeera nevertheless subsequently hosted him to debate precisely those views. So I don't know. I don't think there's been an official blacklisting. The evidence doesn't really support that. Al Jazeera nevertheless subsequently hosted him to debate precisely those views.
I'm sure, and I'm not saying this in any way disparagingly, I'm sure you do think Jews are cheap. That's just a prejudice that a stereotype people carry.
I do not think Jews are cheap. I think that is a unfounded anti-Semitic stereotype. If you think Jews are cheap, you're thinking something idiotic that's based on, prejudice.
To have any political consequence, in my opinion, no. It's a prejudice that people carry with them. I won't say for better or for worse, obviously, but
Okay, he clarified that that is for worse.
Only God knows how many prejudices I carry around with me in situations, as a professor, categorizing students on first meeting them. The question...
There's a difference between spreading prejudice or anti-Semitism like Norm Finkelstein has been doing on Hasan Piker's stream here, and then recognizing that you have prejudices internally and realizing that those prejudices are ridiculous, unfounded. They're prejudice, they're label prejudices for a reason. They're not giving you a accurate depiction of reality. They're stupid. They are stupid. They're simple-minded.
question is not whether I characterize them on first meeting them. I do. It's a prejudice. The question is, do I give them a chance to prove themselves, or does the prejudice manifest itself in them getting a lesser grade? That's when a prejudice, or for worse, obviously, but only God knows how many prejudices I carry around with me in situations, as a professor, categorizing students on first meeting them. The question is not whether I characterize them on first meeting them. I do. It's a prejudice. The question is, do I give them a chance to prove themselves, or does the prejudice manifest itself in them getting a lesser grade? That's when a prejudice becomes a, so to speak, political problem.
The woke terminology is subconscious bias.
Yeah, I think everybody carries subconscious biases. The problem with the woke people is,
yes, again, but what's happening here is like, yes, we all have subconscious biases. It's better, it's more academic to describe these as negativity and positivity biases, but whatever. Not much has been academic about any of this. But there's this conflation between like these subconscious biases that are being discussed here, and anti-Semitism and prejudice and the things that are related to this very issue that are charged against people like Hasan, people like Finkelstein, people like Candace Owens.
They have no idea how the human consciousness works, and they think you can interrupt racism as if you can pull an emergency cord in the subway. Interrupt.
No. Who do you think believes this? And this is Finkelstein laying this on the quote unquote woke people, that you can pull the string on racism. Our cognition can be trained like anything else. It can be trained to emotionally knee-jerk react in a positive utilitarianistic type way, or a positive bias type way, as opposed to a negative bias type way, or a negative utilitarianistic type way. So all of these things are correctable. They take practice. They take an actual change of belief. It seems like Norm Finkelstein is trying to act like this is all hardwired and we all have it. And, that's not the way my mind functions, sir. It's not.
Racism. It was just complete crap. But I don't want to be.
I think it's, what it is? I sometimes sound like a broken record. I haven't really spoken that much today, even though I speak for 8 hours a day normally. It is ultimately a capitalist manifestation. I think it's a very corporate way to approach humans, where you are supposed to present yourself as a brand. A brand is what? Sanitized. A brand is perfect. A brand can't be one way or another, right? It's supposed to be the most manicured version of yourself. And I think that the problem with our approach, even in academia, on a lot of these identity politics related issues, subconscious biases, implicit biases, is that we take away the humanity and the imperfections of humanity from the conversation and turn human beings into like corporate vessels, almost brands. That's the problem.
The human mind is very complex. I mean, any 2-year-old, or I should say every 8-year-old, understands that. And when you're addressing an issue like racism, or what you call subconscious prejudices or whatever, it's the chances of being able to eliminate that in any foreseeable timeline are so remote. So maybe in some ideal society.
Whoa, we got a spicy comment. Everyone knows you align with the Zionists. You have never condemned Israel for the slaughter of Palestinian children. You are the lowest of the low. Unfortunately, you did not do good fact checking on that. Someone could label me as being someone aligned with the Zionists because I care about the well-being of Zionists. I care about the well-being of Palestinians. I care about the well-being of Hamas. I care about the well-being of Iranians. I care about the well-being of Canadians, Americans, all of them. I care about the well-being. If you would have done some fact checking, you would have realized that I have condemned Israel for the quote unquote slaughter of Palestinians in cases where I think there is a seemingly a strong case for war crime. And in general, with regards to the proportionality issue that I see in the state of Gaza and the crimes Hamas committed. Someone said, what? You care about the well-being of Hamas? Yeah, of course I do. I'm a moral well-beingist. And that's not to say I don't think Hamas are legitimate, righteous military targets. I do. But as a moral well-beingist, I think that it is a better outcome for Hamas to be captured as opposed to killed. And all human beings have my moral care and moral consideration. All of them do. That doesn't mean that some human beings aren't righteous military targets. Some are, including terrorists. But that doesn't mean there's anything good about the killing or murder of people. There are righteous killings, but that doesn't mean there's anything good about it. In high resolution moral philosophy, you're going to eventually realize that you need to delineate between goodness, badness, and righteousness and wrongfulness. It's not just about what's good and what's bad in this world. There's a important moral consideration about what is righteous and what is wrongful. So an example I can give you is, well, actually, we can just use the current example. I think it is righteous for the IDF to go hunting for Hamas and bring them to justice for the crimes of October 7th. Is it righteous for the IDF, and this is a hypothetical, would it be righteous for the IDF to kill one Hamas member holding a rocket launcher and shooting a rocket at the IDF, amongst a civilian safe zone population? Would it be righteous for the IDF to retaliate with a 1,000-pound bomb and strike and successfully kill that Hamas member, but also kill 20 children, let's say Palestinian children, in that act? I don't see righteousness in that. Not at all. Not one iota. What I see righteousness in, the knowledge that Hamas and Hamas leadership are taking sanctuary in a particular building with a lot of munitions, and this intelligence is well known, and this becomes a viable military target. But part of the calculus in striking this building means that there is a potentiality for some civilian casualties because there is a known family to be in the area as well. Not confirmed as being in that building per se, but there's a potentiality that civilians might be killed in this strike. I think that strike can be made righteous. ideally the civilian casualties would be eliminated. But in war, that ideal reality is cannot very often be accomplished. One of the reasons is because in situations like we've seen in Palestine, in Gaza, some Hamas members have been embedding themselves closely to civilians and launching attacks from places that civilians are taking shelter. So that's it's a horrible thing. And Graybush, you ask, what about 10 children? No, that is not righteous. 10 children for the exchange of one Hamas militant? No. As a moral well-beingist, I don't like that calculus. We find a way to target that member in a way that doesn't cause 10 child deaths. Or, we you might have to wait for another opportunity. This is the kind of deliberation that's going to go on, by the way, in the International Court of Justice, these particular instances, when we look at proportionality, which is probably going to be the strongest argument for against Israel with regards to genocide. They might pull up particular cases. So in this case, you struck this particular target that, yes, there was a viable military target, Hamas operative, let's say, in this particular area. But this was also known to be a civilian-rich area on the edge of a safe zone. And you struck it with a 1,000-pound bomb. And the blast radius of that bomb killed, let's say, 5 civilians. How can you justify that to us as the International Court of Justice, that meets a reasonable standard of proportionality? Those are the kinds of questions that are going to come up. Yes, whether it's the International Court of Justice or the IHL, whoever's adjudicating those particular potential crimes, right? And then you give an example. What if he's the Hamas leader and he's about to launch an attack that will kill 100 Israelis? Is it to be believed that if he doesn't launch the attack, is this what the intelligence is saying us? If he doesn't launch the attack, that someone else can't just step in and launch that same attack? Yeah, you said IHL. Yeah, ICC. Let's get this straight. Yeah, it's the ICC that will adjudicate war crimes, not the IHL. All right.
80 in 1,000 years from now, these prejudices will be eradicated. But for the moment, I just don't see that as a priority. The priority has to be trying to give people a fair chance in a system that's robbing them of their past, robbing them of their present, and giving them no hope whatsoever for the future. And so that's why I believe that Bernie Sanders and his progeny, they are correct in what they're focusing on.
Well, I guess I do that with Bernie.
Jobs.
In some respects, with his opinion on Israel, where I think that, like, this is something that I've tried to describe.
Before we do that, I'm happy to engage, but for the moment, I have to get back to the Candace Owens question.
Okay, Candace Owens.
Because I want to clarify my opinion. I think that politically, she's pretty much innocuous. She's not seen as a political figure or aspiring to political office. She's kind of a figure, you might say, like Oprah. Oprah appealed to white women, as does apparently Candace Owens, obviously coming from different directions. But I would say politically pretty innocuous. I don't believe that with the case of Tucker Carlson. I think there's a potential political problem there.
I think it goes beyond immediately having an impact in politics or running for office. I think even with Candace Owens.
Graybush. The ICJ is going to make the genocide determination. The ICC is going to determine war crimes.
There's definitely a significant component there because she commands the influence and attention of large swaths of the population. So I wasn't bringing up the Candace Owens thing to like try to lecture you or something, just so you understand. I just wanted to hear your perspective on your experience with Candace Owens. Because I think you should go on every platform. That's my policy.
So after the anti-Semitism, the lack of grasp on the facts, which I understand Hasan is under the same misinformation in what we've demonstrated today. But with this anti-Semitism that is being perpetuated and spread by Norm Finkelstein, Hasan thinks that he should be on more shows.
Problem with Candace Owens is, you know the expression, you have to pick your battles.
Yeah.
There were many things that she said which I strongly disagreed with. And then you have to decide, unless I'm going to stop her at every point, when Cristobal paid Adam Smith, every 2 seconds, let's take a pause here.
Yeah.
Because she disagreed with virtually every point he made. And she did it very effectively, I thought, extremely effectively. But at some point, it just doesn't work. Then it's like, why did you come on the show? If you're going to disagree with every single word this person says, then why did you even come on?
That's not, I wasn't even saying like you should go up there and disagree.
I was careful to, so to speak, pick my battles.
You did pick your battles when it came to defending the Bolsheviks. When she said that the Bolsheviks were exhibiting an anti-Christian bias.
Right. They killed 60 million Christians and then they pretended to be Holocaust survivors.
I like that was the line in the sand that you drew for Candace.
Because then people would say that Norman is unprincipled, that for his entire life, he has identified himself with a certain historic tradition, and now that tradition is being dragged through the mud, and he just sits there nodding. And I wasn't about to do that. I wasn't about to do that because that had to do with my personal integrity. That's the tradition I consider myself part of. But I wasn't appalled. Look, yours is a different generation from mine. People think they have facts when they find it on the web. And if you spend too much time on the dark side of the web.
People think the web? Oh, man. People think they have facts on the web. I think Norm Finkelstein needs to incorporate into his research process the internet.
You're going to find evidence for everything. And that's not the standard of evidence of my generation that you found it somewhere on the dark side of the web. And she thought that she had evidence for all these sorts of things.
Finkelstein has demonstrated time and time again that he doesn't know what evidence is. Like, he seems to discount circumstantial evidence as evidence. He doesn't seem to think testimonial evidence is evidence. These are massive academic fields of inquiry in the philosophy of argumentation, in the philosophy of evidence. Evidence is its own philosophical domain.
And I just tried to be calm and rational and say, no, I don't believe there's evidence for these sorts of claims that you're making. Just as I don't believe that there's evidence that Israel killed John F. Kennedy. Just as I don't believe there's evidence that Israel killed Abraham Lincoln. And just as I don't believe that...
Is that even a theory?
It will be soon, that Israel was the cause of the fall of the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. I just think these things are a real stretch.
We're almost at the end, folks. This has been like, what is this, the 7th episode?
No, you could say whatever you want. That's not, for me, the question. The question is, do I have to take seriously what you say? You're free to say it, but I'm not going to attach any significance to it. You know, Tucker Carlson, among others. As I said, I think 70% of what Tucker Carlson says is true. But when he starts going off and saying that Israel is trying to destroy the United States because it wants to make
Tucker Carlson, among others, as I said, I think 70% of what Tucker says is true. About what? Everything? Finkelstein explicitly presents 70% of his own estimate, quote, I think, not as the result of an identified study, no representative audit, defined corpus, random sample, coding protocol, or independent accuracy. Study was located that establishes Carlson is approximately 70% accurate. Public fact check records document numerous consequential false or misleading Carlson claims. PolitiFact currently lists 31 selected Carlson claims, 0 true, 1 mostly true, 1 half true, 5 mostly false, 13 false, and 11 pants on fire. However, PolitiFact deliberately selects newsworthy or apparently questionable statements rather than randomly sampling Carlson's output. So its scorecard cannot be converted into an overall accuracy rate either. But like, yeah, someone who's a chronic misinformation spreader like Tucker Carlson, to say that he's 70% accurate about the things he says seems pretty asinine. Yeah, I mean, we could run a massive, extensive audit to get an accurate general number on Tucker Carlson, but I'm not going to do it for the sake of this video. But just claiming this without qualifying why you think 70% is ridiculous.
Enter into a partnership with India. I just raised my eyes, like eyebrows. Where did that come from? Or when he insinuates that Israel was involved in the Kennedy assassination. Well, no. Then I think you've gone off the rails.
Well, it's the scapegoating, right? I think this is a concept born out of American chauvinism, Western exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, where I think at the end of the day, if you truly, and I do think Tucker actually has seen the crimes of Israel and has found it to be heinous. I will say that. I think he is a shrewd operator, but I do believe that he genuinely finds it morally repugnant to a certain degree. But I think what he has done and what a lot of people do is, for example, they'll blame Israel for the Iraq War. Right. And this is my distinction. I actually might even disagree with you on what you've said about the Iran war, where I do think that Israel has played a much heavier hand
I do.
in the Iran war.
I do believe that.
Whereas the Iraq war is very clearly imperial extraction of natural resources.
I totally agree.
Whereas there is a divergence now.
I agree with you on both points.
Hey friends, we're on episode 6 and we're about to finish here. And then I will be releasing a full report that you guys can check out if you want to look at the results. I will announce it and make sure people know when it's available. But the results of the fact checking will show up peng-burn.com/analysis.
So I think it's basically shifting the blame over to Israel or even to Jews as a representation of Israel to say we are blameless.
Totally agree.
We are perfectly. We would not be stained with these military quagmires if it wasn't for the Jewish state.
Yeah, I think that I've said I believe there's a problem there. I'm not going to say that Tucker Carlson is an anti-Semite. I'm not going to go there. I didn't say it with Candace Owens either. What I will say is, I believe there is a problem there in what they're saying and this attempt now to blame Israel for everything. It's awful enough what's happened, but now I think it's gone kind of over the top. It's kind of, if I can use the expression, it's kind of a hate fest. And I've noticed that people are very critical of what I've said about Tucker Carlson because I'm kind of ruining the fun. The fun now is.
So we are coming to the end. There was a significant amount of misinformation, unethical behavior by my standards of using well-being as a moral metric. By well-being, I mean physical, mental, and social health. My moral quest is to maximize well-being for myself and those around me. I see anti-Semitism as anti-well-beingism. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism in this video. And we will release the data on exactly how much. And we will also release the data on how much misinformation is in this video. This was a project that took a few days, and I wanted to thank everyone for supporting the project, whether you view this after the fact or whether you were viewing these videos live. I know I was live earlier today, but we're probably going to do an evening show on our other live channel. Just search Pengburn Live on YouTube, and we're probably going to do a community discussion tonight.
Everybody thinks they're so brave and courageous attacking Israel. Well, actually, I think it's perfectly obvious. It takes exactly zero courage right now to attack Israel. I think it takes a certain amount of courage to defend it. It does.
It has shifted quite dramatically, yes. The pendulum has swung in the other direction.
And it's not that I'm in principle against hate fest. There are a lot of people who are deserving of the hate that's directed against them. But one has to, I think, always pause to be as analytically and factually rigorous as possible.
In fact, we might do the group discussion from Discord on the main channel here tonight, because I think a lot of people will want to ask me questions about this fact check and questions about the Dave Farina video and all that drama. So I think we'll probably come back live on the channel here a bit later, after I have some dinner and whatnot.
Because we don't want to create, like you say, we don't want to create distractions and scapegoats. We have to be clear. And one of the things we should be clear about is the nature of our own society, and not to pretend as if Israel hadn't come along, we would have been on a virginally white path.
Norman Finkelstein, thank you so much for coming on. This is a real honor. Where can people find Gaza's Gravediggers?
It can be found on my publisher's website. It's orbooks, orbooks.com, one word. And
So just for the record, Hasan considered this conversation to be an honor, and there was a good, strong portion of anti-Semitism in this and a lot of misinformation.
I see it as the record of what happened. I'm trying now to combine Gaza and Inquest into its martyrdom with this, Gaza's Gravediggers, an inquiry into corruption in high places. And I want to make it a 2-volume set called The Black Books on Gaza, the truth about what happened. And I believe that if you know the truth, then you will have less difficulty answering the question, do you condemn what Hamas did on October 7th? I think you'll find that you're able to say, you know what, after what was done to those people, maybe what happened October 7th was wrong, but I'm not going to be on.
Maybe what happened on October 7th was wrong. It's a very deeply immoral thing to say. We're talking about almost certainly grape and gang rape happened of innocent civilians, murders, slaughtering. Child was abducted as a hostage. Many other people were as well. About 1,200 people murdered. Maybe? Come on.
My high horse scolding them for what was done any more than I would lecture Nat Turner on why what he did in 1831 was wrong.
Well, once again, thank you so much, Norm. This was a real incredible opportunity. I apologize. We were supposed to have this conversation a very long time ago, but I guess it turned out to be somewhat fortuitous given the circumstances. Still, there are plenty of crises happening around the world. But once again, thank you so much for coming on. This was a real honor to have you on. And thank you for all of your work.
Okay, well, there we have it. That was the Hasan and Norm Finkelstein discussion. Took us 6 episodes to get through it. A lot of interesting things emerged. There was a lot of attempted softening of anti-Semitism and trying to make it seem like, we all do it, was kind of a general sentiment I got from some of those sections. Some just blatant falsehoods, misinformation. But what I think I'll do is I think tonight's live stream, we'll go live again here on the channel. Hopefully you guys come back for that. There'll be a chance to call in and chat with me, ask me questions live on the air, challenge me. By way of our Discord server. Make sure you are a member of our Discord server. And any questions you might have about any of the fact checking that's been happening on the channel, we can re-adjudicate things. If you think a mistake was made, we can check it all. Anyways, thanks for showing up for this earlier stream. Those of you who did. And of course, make sure you're out there maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you. And